I'm honored. This is Michael Lilly. I'm honored to introduce my dear friend, Judge Shackley Raffetto. I've known him for 4 decades. All of you got the email of summarizing his illustrious career. What you don't know is he started out as a Marine. And he decided at some point, instead of being a Marine, he'd go into law, and became a successful trial lawyer on the mainland and here on Maui. But in the early 80s, he also joined the Judge Advocate Corps of the Naval Reserve. What was that? Anyway, he joined the Judge Advocate Corps, and he spent, I guess, 20 years or more in the Judge Advocate Corps and retired as a captain. So he's not only a judge, he's a captain in the Naval Reserve, retired. And when I used to appear in front of him, every now and then there'd be somebody sitting next to him who was a judge or a lawyer or a law professor from some foreign country, that he was showing how the judicial system works in Hawaii or the United States. And I always found that fascinating. And this is what he's going to talk about. Some of the people that he's had contact with around the world has just been a fascinating tale. So without further ado, Judge Captain Shackley Raffetto.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. What Mike didn't say is when I was in the reserves, I served twice under his command in various units of the Navy Reserve, and we had a very nice time together. Glad to be here with all of you folks today. I'm going to apologize in advance. I had a whole bunch of photographs, and what I had planned to do is an opening kind of overview and then go through a series of photographs about different places that I had traveled to and people I'd met and people who had come and served in my court observer program. But we had technical problems, so I'm not able to rely on the photographs. So I hope you'll forgive me. I'll do my best to meander through all of this. And please, though, if you have any questions or comments, speak up. I think a couple of people are present today who were part of all this adventure. And so I wanted to start with one thing before I get to the Navy. This is basically about my adventures in professionally internationally. Sometimes it was teaching, sometimes it was serving as an international judge for Jessup, sometimes it was putting on programs or hosting foreign law professionals at my court in a program that I established, and I'll go through all that. But first, years ago, I visited London to visit my English family at the time. And after hanging out with them for a while, they decided that I needed to have a break. So they had a good friend who was a barrister in London, and they arranged for me to spend a week traveling around with him and seeing the insides of the English barrister view of the English trial system. So I did that. It was absolutely fascinating. This guy was he was a member of Gray's Inn. And as you know, in London, you have to be a member of the Inns of Court if you're going to practice as a barrister in London. I'm not sure about outside of London. And as you know, there's this dichotomy between solicitors and barristers in the English system, whereas barristers are the only people who can go to court. So the solicitors seek out the barristers and provide the cases to be litigated. And the chambers themselves in Gray's Inn were just a big room. I was surprised to see this, but it's just desks pushed together with lots of barristers in the same room. And then there's a clerk who had a separate office. And the clerk seemed to be the person who accepts the new cases from the solicitors as they're seeking barristers to represent their clients. And I'm not sure how the pecking order and how those get distributed, but the gentleman I was with received cases, and then he would meet with the solicitor, and the solicitor would tell him the witnesses, what they're going to say, all that. The solicitor basically did the trial prep, and the barrister would write all this down in just a very small, like a blue book, Harvard blue book, for essay, to write essays in, and then would go to court. And so we went to both the central law courts are where the civil cases are heard in London, and then the Old Bailey is where the criminal cases are heard. So we went to both. And when we went in, the civil court, for instance, it was very interesting. In the English system, you don't get a jury trial except in a civil case, except for, I think it's defamation, maybe fraud. I'm not sure about that, but traffic accidents, things like that, you don't get a jury trial. It's just a trial to the court. And the barrister, these barristers are incredibly eloquent in the way that they present their cases, much more than we are. And they don't use demonstrative evidence. It's all verbal, and they seem to do it on the fly. And but one interesting thing that I observed was when we would go to court, the barristers wear a black robe like our judge's robe, and then a wig. And they would carry that in their briefcase, and we would go into the courthouse, and then there is a locker room, which they call the wigging room. And the barristers all go into the wigging room. And of course, they all kind of arrive at the same time. And while they're getting their paraphernalia on, they start talking about the case. And I saw several cases get settled right there in the wigging room because it allowed the lawyers the opportunity to get together. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. It's just like us on the courthouse steps, finally talking a case over and getting it settled. Anyway, I just put that out there as something that I thought was very interesting. Now, I didn't do much international work until as Mike said, until I joined the Navy, and that was around 1980. And as a JAG officer, I started out with the Navy Legal Services Office, and our mobilization place, if we were mobilized for that particular unit, was Subic Bay in the Philippines. And so I spent a couple tours down in Subic Bay working in the International Law Department, which really was, and we worked with Philippine national lawyers who would represent American servicemen in the local courts. But we also, I remember one time what would happen is that sailors would go into these, right next to the base is this huge honky-tonk area with bars and bar girls, and it was like the Wild West. And so the sailors, they'd get off the ship and they'd go right there, of course, and they'd get in trouble. And one of the things that would happen is if a bar girl claimed that a sailor had injured her, that the Navy would put them on legal hold until the case was resolved. And the bar girls figured this out because the Navy would pay off the girls if they needed the guy to go on the ship so the ship could deploy. And so there was one bar that was doing this. Seemed to be a lot of these. And so the international lawyer said, well, come on, we're going to go down and talk to this bar owner. So we went down into the honky-tonk area and into this bar and way in the back room. And three of us went in there. And basically, we told the guy, this has got to stop or else you're going to be on the blacklist, which would be, the end of his business. And it stopped after that. And I remember thinking, so this is international law. I felt like I was like a mafioso, actually, but I guess I was protecting U.S. interests overseas. Anyway, what happened eventually is the man who was the commanding officer of the Navy Legal Services Office, he was transferred, and he became the commanding officer of a program called the Defense Institute of International Legal Studies, located in Newport, Rhode Island. That is an organization it's administered by the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency. The acronym for the Defense Institute of International Legal Studies is DIILS, which I'll use to refer it to simply. And what they do is they use mostly military officers. It's a purple command, so they're officers from all branches of service. And they put together teams, usually 4 or 5 people, to go all over the world to present training on issues on all kinds of subjects, but military justice, legal aspects of peacekeeping, rule of law, terrorism, all kinds of subjects. They have a department that pumps out PowerPoints and materials so that the people who are assigned to teams will have those to use as the basis for their presentations. And usually you'd go to a country like Romania, for instance, and you'd be assigned maybe 4 subjects to talk about, and the other people would likewise be assigned. And then we would go and we would put training seminars on. Now, the reason we were doing this is when the U.S. gives foreign aid to other countries that can be spent for military purposes, the law requires that they spend a certain amount of that money for training in human rights, rule of law, those subject matters. They can't just spend it all on M16s. And so this was the agency that provides that, one of them that provides that kind of training. And it's unique because DIILS operates under Title 10, which is what the Department of Defense operates under on the US Code, but also Title 22. And that deals with foreign affairs. And so what that enables the DIILS training to do is to provide training for civilians as well as military personnel. So we often had legislators or other government officials who were not military people in our training seminars. We were not limited, so it made it very flexible. And as a result of being allowed to participate in those kind of training seminars, I went to many different countries. The first place I went to was Albania, which I didn't even know where it was on the map. I had to look it up. This was just after the end of the Soviet Union. And so going to some of these, Albania had been the poorest country in Europe at the time. And so going there, you could see what it had been like. It was before things started changing after the end of the Cold War. And we put on seminars there. I met some really nice people. I ended up going back there 5 times. And eventually I made so many friends. I was invited to go to a big wedding there, and I went on my own, had a really nice time. I'm still in touch with those folks. And most of the places I went to, I was able to make friends and had very nice relationships. And I mean, I went to Russia, China, and eventually I went to China, not with DIILS, but I'll just say as a segue, every place I went, ordinary people were really nice. Except one time when I was in China, which I'll describe when I got crosswise with the government, but otherwise everyone was extremely nice to me wherever I went. And it just shows you that our common humanity exists despite all these political differences that seem to be creating chaos in the world today. And I think it's important to remember that. And the spirit in which I did these things was really, I like that idea of the citizen ambassador, that when we go overseas, we could be the ugly American, or we can try to learn something about the local culture and make friends and show people that we're okay. And we're just people like them. So I did a lot of that. And then I had the idea, well, we would lecture about due process of law and military justice and so on. But I realized that just lecturing and then leaving, you wonder how much impact that actually has. Do people really gain any kind of understanding from something like that? And I could see that it was probably minimal. So I came up with the idea of creating what I call the International Court Observer Program. And what that is it's based on this concept. When I was at the National Judicial College, where they send we send our judges after they've served for a few months, there was a speaker who talked about something called a judicial ride-along. And he pitched it in these terms. He said, look, he he says, if the judiciary is not having difficulty with the legislature and certain legislators, invite them to come to court and sit next to you for a trial so that they can get a better understanding about how the judiciary operates and what, the services that it provides to the community. And I remembered that, and I thought it was a great idea. And actually, I did it. There was a Hawaii legislator, and I think it was Donna Kim. This was some time ago. And she was, I think, antagonistic or critical of the judiciary. So I put the word out that I would like to offer her the opportunity to come and sit next to me for a jury trial. And she was game. She took me up on it. And she came over and we did a short jury trial together. And she really got into it. And we had a very nice time. And so I think things like that help in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, I had done that. And so I thought, well, why can't we do this with foreign law professionals that I meet on these DIILS trips overseas? So I talked to DIILS about it, and they said, well, we have to work through the local embassy because they would have to fund it. So we did that. And we did that in Mongolia first. The second country I went to was Mongolia, and we did a seminar for the justices of the Supreme Court of Mongolia, and went to the U.S. Embassy there and asked them if they would support the program. And the program that I pitched was basically this: you send the person over, I will meet them, and they can stay at my home. I have a garage with a guest room on it with its own facility. So it's very private and it's perfect for this sort of thing. And every day I'll take them to court, and I'll make sure that they sit next to me in court and that we do a jury trial together so they can see. And I thought this was important. I wanted them to see that we have in our system, the common law system, the citizens can have direct and substantial participation in the process of justice. I call it citizen-derived justice. And just, I'm going to segue for a second. Once I became a circuit court judge, I got really interested in the jury process. I was on some committees that tried to improve the system, but I became convinced that the reason that we have a relatively high belief in the rule of law in our country is the jury system and free speech and some of the other rights in the first 10 amendments. And the reason I think that is because if you in a civil law system, which is most of the rest of the world, a citizen never goes to the court unless they have a problem. In our system, huge numbers of our citizens show up in court every week to make themselves available for possible jury service. Some of them actually serve. As a circuit court judge, I've presided over probably 300 jury trials. And I talked to every single jury after the trial was over because I wanted to know and understand what, as much as I could about the dynamics of that process. And I sent thank you letters to everybody, and a big part of the circuit court judge's job is taking care of that jury. Anyway, by the way, I only disagreed with the jury verdict once, which I think is remarkable. It just shows you that those 12 citizens, once they realize they're stuck, and they're going to have to serve, they do a great job. And the database that 12 citizens bring to the process of deciding what happened based on what's presented in court is just amazing. And I thought that that's worth showing foreign law professionals to see how that works. And so I began to do that. Justice Ganzorig from the Supreme Court of Mongolia was my first court observer. And he came over for 2 weeks and we had a very nice night. The thing is, when these people come and they're staying at my house, we cook dinner together and one thing I insisted though, for most of them was I would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go swimming for an hour before I went to court as a stress management tool. And I said, okay, we're getting up to go swimming in the morning. But they were all game. So we did that. And then after that, I was doing some duty in the Navy. I used to help put on the annual operational law conference for PACOM, the Pacific Command. It's now called the Indo-Pacific Command. And they had an operational law conference every year. And they would invite, and the US would pay for, participation by all nations bordering the Pacific. And then actually it included Mongolia, which is a landlocked country. But the Russians and the Chinese and the Vietnamese showed up for the first time. And I was in charge of greeting and taking care of the VIPs. So it was a great job because I got to go out to the airport and meet all these really interesting people. And we would have it 1 year in Honolulu and then 1 year someplace else. So that 1 year I was in Vancouver, and I saw one of the guests was a Russian general. And I thought, well, we're at this cocktail party. And I thought, well, I'm going to go up and talk to this guy because I've never met a Russian general before. So I go up, and he's with another fellow. The fellow I met was General Gennady Zolotukhin, who turned out to be the JAG of the Russian army. And he didn't speak English, but he had a companion, and his name was Bakhtiar Tuzmahemedov. And Bakhtiar was a lawyer at the Constitutional Court in Moscow, which is a pretty important position in their system. And he would translate for the general. And Bakhtiar, I eventually talked to him about the court observer program, and he got interested. So he eventually came over and served as participated in the court observer program. And turns out he's a very influential guy. And so over the years, he enabled the participation of, let's see, I think in total I had 6 different Russian law professionals come over. One of whom was Elena Getman, who is a lawyer at the Constitutional Court. She's now on the Supreme Court of Russia. And I visited her at the Supreme Court I had some pictures, which I'm sorry I can't show you this. I have pictures of the Supreme Court of Russia and the Constitutional Court as well. Anyway, I went to visit her. I was over there for a Jessup program, and I called up my friend Bakhtiar and said, you know, I'd like to go visit Elena at the Supreme Court. And I'm thinking I'll just drop by and see her office, you know, and leave. Well, he arranged for a formal appearance at the Supreme Court of Russia, and they sent somebody from the U.S. Embassy over to make sure I guess I didn't do anything silly. But it was a very nice visit. Bakhtiar himself was later appointed as a justice of the International Court for the International Court handling the Rwanda genocide. And then later on, he served in the appellate division of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. So those are 2 court observers who went on and you know, achieved really great career achievements. The rest of them were all, let's see, who else did I have? I had a court observer from Germany who was someone who came and worked in my chambers for a while. A military lawyer from Thailand, Colonel, and that was interesting because the Navy knew about the court observer program, but they knew about it at PACOM. And PACOM called me up and said, look, we've got this guy who's been very helpful to us, and we'd like you, we'd like to know if you would entertain him as a court observer and bring him to your court so we can do something for him. I said, yeah, for sure. And he was a very nice guy. In fact, I was going on a trip with Jim Kruger to Bhutan a few years ago, and we passed through Thailand and had dinner with him there, him and his wife. I had a court observer from Iraq who was with the anti-corruption agency there. I met when I was in Iraq. That was one of the places I went to with DIILS. Was we went to Iraq right after they captured Baghdad, and we with a team, and we worked with lawyers and investigators. The anti-corruption agency the job was to investigate and prosecute corruption in Iraq, and also to educate people in government agencies about the new Iraqi ethics rules. Two of those people, the one who was the court observer and my translator at the time, eventually came to the United States. The court observer, Haidar was his name, he came over, and then he went home, and the insurgents found out that he had been helping the Americans, and so they attacked his home, and he fled to America, and helped him get political asylum. Now he's a realtor, a very successful realtor. We got his family over, and he's a very successful realtor in Arizona. The translator, Nadia, she actually got a Fulbright scholarship to the International University in Monterey. And, but when she was ready to go home, they told her, don't come home because they're going to be killed because you work for the US Army. And so I helped her get a lawyer and wrote some letters. And she was able to get to stay in the United States. And she later became a citizen, and she's now teaches Arabic at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. So again, you know, you make friends and help each other out as human beings. I had two people from Mongolia, Judge Genzorg and a prosecutor, and then I also had hosted, at the last evolution I did for DIILS was they called up and said, we want to send 10 military lawyers, military judges from Afghanistan to your court for 2 weeks, just to hang out and see how the legal system works. So, and they sent some escort officers too, so I didn't have to deal with 10 people, but they did, and that's too bad I don't have my pictures of this. I have pictures of all this. So I was able to have them at the court, and then we, of course, had them at the Supreme Court. Both Chief Justice Moon and Chief Justice Reckenwell were very supportive of all these programs that I put together. And so we did that. And let's see, I'm just about through court observer. Then what happened was during this time, I was recommended to participate in the Jessup International Law Moot Court competition in Russia. You're probably familiar with the Jessup program. About 90 countries participate every year, and they each country selects their best teams, and then they have the finals in Washington, DC. Well, I went twice to Russia for the Jessup, and then I met someone at the Washington, DC finals who recommended I come to China. And so I did that. I started going to China to serve as a volunteer judge on their competition. And I did that for like at least 12 years. And China has I don't know if they still do, given current circumstances, but they had the second largest Jessup program in the world behind the United States. They would have maybe 50 law schools participate. And so I started doing that, and linked up with Russell Liu. I don't know if he's on today. And he showed me around a lot, and we had some adventures. And eventually, though, I had to retire when I hit 70. But I had this idea to promote jury trials. So I had a complete transcript of a short jury trial, drug case. I had the DVD of the actual trial. I prepared a lengthy PowerPoint about how the trial operates, the role of the prosecutor role, the defender, all that. And I told Russell, let's put it on at your school where you're a professor, which was Beijing Foreign Studies University. And he talked to his dean, and the dean agreed. So I stayed after the Jessup for a week, and they put me up, and we worked with a couple of the professors there, and we put on a complete jury trial moot program. using all Chinese law students in all the roles. And we'd have them share the role of the prosecutor, share the role of the, but we had a jury. And since they had the transcript and we, briefed it for a couple of days beforehand, so they knew how the whole process worked. And I served as a judge. It took most of a week to do the whole program. But in China, most legal education is students memorizing statutes. So things like the Jessup, where they get to stand up and argue, and now the jury trial are unique experiences for them, and I think very valuable. And so what happened was, one of the people who had served as the Jessup judge came and helped, and he was the lawyer for the American ambassador to China, and he saw the program. And he pitched it, I guess, to the ambassador as a program that would be worthy of bringing to China. And I think the reason they decided to do that is that they had tried to put together legal programs with China and had not been successful. So they saw me putting this program on with Russell at the Beijing Foreign Studies University and said, well, that's maybe something that would be useful. And they contacted universities around China to see if they would be interested, and they got a real positive response. In the meantime, I had gone over to the University of International Relations and taught for the summer school and put the trial on again, and it was again very popular and successful. But the embassy then contacted me and asked me if I would come over for a month and travel around China and put on the program. And in the meantime, which I agreed to do, and we were working out the details. In the meantime, they put me in touch with a Professor Taihei Chen, who was a law professor in Guilin, China. And they said, well, you got to meet this guy because he's very enthusiastic about the common law system and the jury system in particular. He apparently studied a little bit in England and learned about it. So we corresponded by email, and I said to him, look, if you put together a group, I'll put a program together here in Hawaii. You can come over and see a jury trial. And he did that. He got 4 or 5 people together, and I put a little program together, and I met him at the airport in Honolulu, and we went down to the Supreme Court and the Circuit Court and met some judges, and then they watched an entire jury trial in Judge Ochiai's court. And he arranged for them to talk to the jurors afterwards, which was a really unique opportunity for them. And then, of course, I showed him around Hawaii. And so when he went back, I talked to the embassy. I said, look, if we're going to do this, let's include Professor Chen. And he agreed. And so we were going to start the first jury trial at his university. And what we did was, in the meantime, I'm emailing all these materials to all these universities, and it looks like it's really going to be a go. So I get on the plane and I go over to China. And when I get there, all of the universities that had expressed the desire to have me come started to cancel. And I wasn't sure why. And they also ordered Professor Chen not to have anything to do with the program. In retrospect, this was the changes that were beginning to happen in China under Chairman Xi. And so, but I was already in China, so I said, what now? And they said, well, can you convert this into a lecture? So I worked a day or so, and I thought, well, if I'm going to present lectures about the American justice system, I'm going to emphasize the rights of defendants. So I did that. And I put together a PowerPoint, and they arranged all these venues all over China. So I spent the next month traveling around China, went to 9 different countries, 9 different cities, and with speaking venues, several at each place. Ended up in Chengdu, which is way out in the west, which is a very interesting place. And then I came back, and I forgot to tell you. Because of the Professor Chen issue, the local authorities began to harass me. And what I mean by that is I would walk down the street and somebody would walk right up in my face and take a photograph. And in Guangzhou, I was supposed to speak at the consulate there, and the police showed up in front and were telling everybody to go home, that there wasn't going to be any program and they should go home. And they literally followed me. When I would go to a venue, we'd go in a van and there would be like 4 people from the embassy. And they would follow. You could see them follow, and they would sit outside and smoke their cigarettes or whatever while I was inside. And when I come out, they'd glare at me. And, you know, it was very unnerving. It didn't seem to dissipate after a while. I guess they figured I wasn't as dangerous as they might have thought, but it was not pleasant. And it just shows you in a system like that you're vulnerable, and if they ever pick you up, you're in big trouble, and it's nothing that the embassy can do for you. So you have to be very careful. But anyway, let's see. So I finished that and I came home, and I was, you know, thinking what I was going to do next. And I got an email from Russell Yu saying that he saw Professor Chen's name on an Amnesty International list that he had been one of the 300 human rights lawyers who were arrested and imprisoned in China. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I looked at the list and confirmed his name. And then I tried to figure out a way that I could get help for him. And I got on the internet and I finally found an organization called DIILS, which is a nonprofit organization run by John Cam in San Francisco. John Cam he was a executive with a Fortune 500 company in Hong Kong for many years, and he was the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, and he had left that and he started a nonprofit. The purpose of the nonprofit included keeping track of all human rights people who are arrested and imprisoned in China. And his idea, I guess, is just by keeping a list and letting the Chinese know that we have the list, it assists those people in that they're not forgotten. And so when I approached him about the Professor Chen situation, it was like a perfect match, and he agreed to help. And of course, he had all these connections in the Chinese government. And I was going to say, when Professor Chen was arrested, he had been ready to go to America, to University of Pacific, to study for a summer or something. And he and his wife and child had visas. So when he was arrested, his wife had the presence of mind to go down to the airport and get on the plane and fly to San Francisco with her. She's pregnant and she has a 4-year-old boy. She doesn't speak any English. And so she arrived in San Francisco and told the immigration people what the situation was. And they basically said, well, come back in 6 months. And so there she was, but she was able to enlist the aid of the Chinese Coconut Wireless in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is probably pretty substantial. Got a room. John Cam was able to get her legal assistance, and we got some money for her. And she had her baby. And in the meantime, we were working to try to get Professor Chen out of prison. And we're able to do that. He got out, he was under house arrest. And through working through the government, and this went up, my understanding is it went up to the US Secretary of State to make the request or do whatever they have to do. And finally, we were able to get him humanitarian parole. So he was able to get out of prison, out of house arrest, and get on the plane for San Francisco and be reunited with his family. And now he lives in San Francisco with his family, had another child, 2 of which now are born in America. And he's a contractor in California, and he's very successful. It's funny though, at the time they said, well, we can do all this and we can get him the humanitarian parole, but would you be willing to agree to provide financial support for he and his family for 2 years? Well, I guess I'll have a big Chinese family. So I said, fine, let's just do it. And so he came over. I saw he and his family in December up in San Francisco, and we had a really nice time. And his wife speaks perfect English now, drives up the freeway in this nice new car that they have because he's so successful. One last thing I'll say about that is that in California, you don't have to be a citizen to be a member of the bar. And so I thought, I heard about that, and I thought, well, you know, maybe Professor Chen could qualify and he could become a lawyer in California. And so I contacted the California bar. I'm a California bar member myself. And they said, well, you have to have a certificate of good standing from your bar association. And I realized, of course, he's not going to get that from the Chinese government. So I wrote a letter to the bar asking him to waive that requirement and telling him the situation. And to their credit, they waived it. But I never could get him to take the bar because he became too successful as a businessman. And so I don't think he's ever going to look back. He's doing real well now. Let's see, did I miss anything? A couple of other things. After that, I hosted a group of Mongolian prosecutors. Justice Ganzorg, he came to the United States, got an LLM in constitutional law from George Washington, and went back to Mongolia, and he became he was a deputy prosecuting attorney for Mongolia, and he wanted to bring a group of Mongolian lawyers to Hawaii for training. So I asked the then prosecutor, John Kim in Maui, if he would put a program on, and he said he would. So they all came over, and we had training at the Maui prosecutor's office. And then we went to Honolulu and met with the Attorney General, David Louis at the time, about some sort of continuing training, although I don't think anything was actually worked out. And then we, had a photo op at the Supreme Court with Justice Reckton-Wall, and then I did I lectured on the American justice system at the University of Fukuoka, both for the students and then separately for the faculty, and met members of the Fukuoka Bar Association who were very interested in the drug court that I had created in Second Circuit. So I presented a program on the drug court there, and then they invited me to come down to Nagasaki. So I went down there and did the same. And then they wanted to, the Fukuoka Bar Association wanted to come to Maui and to see the drug court. So I talked to Judge Cardoza, who was chief judge then, and we arranged a program, and they came over, and we spent the day with presentations for this group from Japan about the Maui drug court, which went off very well. And at the end, we were having dinner, and to my surprise, Judge Valdez, Judge Bisson, and Judge Valdez's wife, who dances the hula, came in and played Hawaiian music and entertained everybody, and got the Japanese girls up dancing the hula, like it's at a tourist stop. Anyway, I can't think of anything else that I could cover. I'm sorry I don't have the photographs, guys. It would have been, I think, more interesting for you. But are there any questions or comments?
Okay, if anyone has any questions for Judge Raffetto, please put them in the chat box and I'll read them out loud. Yeah, go ahead and place your questions. I'll take about a couple minutes to comment.
Okay, in the meantime, I'll say I've done a number of interviews with the Mongolians and the Chinese, and then on other things on Think Tech Hawaii. So if you want to look at any of that, you can search for it on YouTube. Another program I did is, I forgot to mention this, that when I was working with DIILS, I worked with a country coordinator for DIILS named Todd Huntley. We got to be very good friends, and he DIILS got an inquiry from the Geneva Center for the Democratic Control of Armed Forces, which I will call DCAF. It's a Swiss government organization that was involved in security sector reform in former Eastern Europe, mostly former Soviet countries, and they requested that someone from DIILS participate in conferences in Russia, and so he contacted me, and we went to Moscow and then St. Petersburg for a second one, and then I became a consultant for DCAF and went to a number of different countries, mostly in Eastern Europe, but also went to Indonesia and then a UN conference in Tonga, mainly presenting about American military justice. And just, you may find this interesting, in the Eastern European countries, you know, when there was all the Soviet Union, Soviet military had a JAG Corps of sorts. But when the Soviet Union dissolved and all those countries were on their own, like Armenia and Poland and Georgia and those places, they had to reconstitute their militaries. And but they had the problem of what to do with military justice. And most of them just sent military criminal issues or disciplinary issues to the civilian court system, which didn't work out very well. Because it removed the people for extended periods of time from service in the military. And also DCAF was concerned with the concept of civilian control of the military. So we traveled to a number of countries, including Armenia, which was a very interesting place, and Kiev twice, to present on various subjects related to those kinds of problems. So, any questions?
Yes, we do have a couple questions in the chat. Question is, what do you think is the intellectual caliber of the Chinese law students who, under the civil system, are actually the equivalent of U.S. undergrad students, especially when English is not their native language?
Good question. Well, first up, the Chinese government policy is law students learn English, and I think all the other students learn English as well. So I was always able to teach in English without translation. Same thing for the Jessup. Jessup is always in English. The students themselves, I mean, I met a lot of students and taught at the University of International Relations. They were first class as far as interest and diligence and hard work and smart. Very, very good students. And they were not hampered by the fact that English was a second language. They were quite fluent. Their system must be pretty good in teaching English. And it was interesting because I tried to get a Jessup program started in Mongolia, and one of the problems was, the big problem, is they don't speak English. And you can see that when the Chinese government made the decision to make students learn English, it made accessible all of the academic possibilities of the English-speaking world. Very clever.
Okay, next question. What are the different functions between the Russian Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court? Are they in a hierarchical relationship?
Well, this constitutional court thing is interesting. My understanding is it began in Austria. The Germans adopted it after World War II, the two separate courts. The Russians picked it up from the Germans. The Mongolians have it as well. And I've asked in both Mongolia and Russia, what is the difference in the jurisdiction between the courts? Because, I could see that there would be problems there. And I never got a clear articulation of that. They say things like, well, the Constitutional Court is there to protect constitutional rights. But you can imagine circumstances where there might be an overlap of or issues of jurisdiction between the two. I never got a real clear answer, but that's what they said.
Okay, next question. Are there any procedures or practices from any of the foreign jurisdictions that you believe would be something that should be adopted by American courts, other than wearing wigs?
No, and I saw some that I didn't like. Well, first off, the court systems in China and Russia are corrupt. You know that. There's no question about that. I was in Romania once visiting a court, and they showed me, they were pointing out where everybody sits, and there was a chair right, it was like the judge, and then there's another nice chair right next to the judge. And I said, who sits there? I thought maybe it was for the witnesses. And they said, no, the prosecutor sits there. And I said, well, don't you think the defendant might think that's a little intimidating to have the prosecutor sitting next to the judge during the trial? They said, oh no, that's quite natural. But things like that, you see. But I as far as procedures elsewhere that I think we should adopt, no. I think our common law system is really based on, it's the most sensible system that I can see. You know, these civil law systems get very complicated, and our system is so simple that our ordinary citizens can basically operate it. And it doesn't get simpler than that.
One last question. Since people have been asking for pictures, and I know because of the technical difficulties we had earlier today, would you be willing to share your photos through the HSBA so that we can put on our newsletter for people to view?
Sure. Be nice if I could explain some of them, though.
Yeah. If you can, like, along with, if you share your photos, you can share like maybe like a couple sentence descriptions of each photo, and I think that would be okay.
Well, you want it, well, we could do this again if we could get the photos to work.
For sure. Yeah, I think thank you, Judge Raffetto. I will now pass the mic to Mr. Mike Lilly, who will give the closing remarks, and take it away, Mr. Mike Lilly.
Well, you can see with Judge Raffetto, one of the reasons why it's too bad that judges are forced to retire at 70. We lost a great jurist when he had to step down. But I've heard some of these stories, and I've heard some new ones today, and I know everyone on here today has been just as fascinated as I am for his incredible experience and his brush with other judicial systems. And we all thank you, Shackley, for joining us and giving us this great presentation.
Thank you. Semper Fi and aloha.